So, good evening, and we'll continue with chapter 1 of Pirkei Avot, and just to sort of refresh or bring us up to speed. So, it seems to me that we are now in a section that is aimed primarily at those who are serving as judges, okay, which is what, and certainly in this time period, that was primarily what a rabbi did. I mean, rabbinic ordination was certification that you were proficient in halakha and were able to function as a judge. And there are actually two different types of Yori and Yadin. Yadin, one was really for financial matters, and then the Yadin was for criminal matters because there was some degree of autonomy. Anyway, so we did do Mishnah 9, but do it again just quickly. Okay, so Yehuda ben Tabai, Veshimon ben Shetach, Kiblu Mihem, they were the next level in the tradition of the Zugot, of the pairs. So they followed Yoshua ben Parachia and Nitai Arbeli. And Yehuda ben Tabai said, don't be like the lawyers, meaning that if you're the judge, be the judge, right? Not you in the course of your investigating the witnesses, don't be an advocate, right? When the litigants are standing before you, look upon them as if they were both guilty, right? That is when, they should be both on the same level. And I guess, what we would call a hermeneutic of suspicion, right? That assume they're guilty. But when they leave your presence and they've accepted the judgment that you have laid down, look upon them as if they were both innocent. All right, and if there are any questions or comments on this, and I can't see everybody because of the share screen, but we're a small enough group, so if you have a question or comment, just sort of, you can jump in. You don't have to raise a hand or whatever.
Well, one thing, so
Yeah.
it says, Judith ben Tabai, he received the oral tradition, and then he said, so is he building on the tradition he has received?
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole point, right? Is that that's what it means. I mean, this is known as Shalshelet HaKabbalah, right? The chain of tradition, right? And so you always, I mean, there are a couple of things, particularly at this sort of level, the relationship between a student and their teacher, okay? And in fact, another word for smicha is hatarat hora'ah or heter hora'ah, okay? Which means really it is permission, like in theory, one is not supposed to teach or rule during the lifetime of their teacher, right? But by receiving hatarat hora'ah, your teacher was giving you permission to teach and to rule while they were still alive, okay? but and we'll see this later, almost certainly not tonight, but at some point, right? That one of the things that was very, very important to them, Hamevi davar b'shem omro mevi geula le'olam. When you quote something in the name of the one who originally said it, you bring redemption to the world. Okay, so in other words, I mean, it's sort of like, still in higher education, right? I mean, you're allowed to quote, you should quote, but when you quote, you attribute, right? You footnote it. You don't claim something that was an idea that you received from somebody else as if it was your original work, right? And so, I mean, as a general rule, people stood in the lineage of their teacher. Not always. I mean, it's not like you could never disagree with something that you were taught, right? But the idea of quoting it accurately, okay, and I think I mentioned this before, but when you get into the Gemara, right, and you'll, because this is an oral tradition, right? So you might have a discussion in the Gemara where a rabbi who has lived generations before, right, seems to be contradicting himself, right? He says one thing and then he says it's opposite, right? And sometimes they'll try and figure out how to resolve this tension or this contradiction. And then somebody say, well, this is in this case, but this is in this case, right? Or this applies to the Jews of Eretz Israel, this applies to the Jews of Babylon. But sometimes they come to the conclusion that the Mishnah has basically been badly transmitted, all right? That whoever was supposed to remember it misremembered it, right? So all of that is very, very important. To maintain a fidelity to your teacher, to quote them accurately, et cetera, right? So they stood in that certain lineage, okay? And we'll see, right? So here Yehuda ben Tabai and Shimon ben Shetach, you're going to see that their perspectives, at least on what's attributed to them here, are quite similar. Okay, so Shimon ben Shatach Omer, and I mentioned 2 weeks ago, right? If you live in Jerusalem, right, you've heard of Shimon ben Shetach because he's a major street. I don't know if he's a major street anywhere else in Israel, but in Jerusalem, he's a major street. So everybody in Jerusalem has at least heard of him. They may not know anything about him, but they've heard of him because he's got a street. Okay. So Shimon ben Shatach Omer Have Marbe Lachkor et Ha'edi. Right. Be thorough in interrogating the witnesses. Okay. Interrogate them thoroughly. V'havei zahir bidvarecha, and be careful in your words. Shema mitocham yilmadu lishaker, lest from your words they learn to lie, right? Don't ask leading questions, right? Be very, very careful the way you phrase your questions, because you could phrase your questions in such a way that the witnesses, right? What does it mean they'll learn to lie? I mean, I guess it means, right, they'll take a guess at the answer that you want, and they'll try and give you that answer. Okay. Does anybody have a comment or a question on this? Because I have a perfect example of this that I'll share with you in a minute. But especially from our participants with law degrees. I don't know. Anything to say about this?
Rabbi, I
Yeah,
do. I mean, I thought this was great, really. I mean, I've only spent however many years since I graduated from law school trying to learn how to do this. And it is really a problem. You can lead people and not give the answer, but if you're leading, you do that for a purpose when you're prosecute or when you're trying to control a witness. This really, in my opinion, currently would be what you want to do for a deposition under our system.
right.
But I know under other systems, they the judges have to try to get the facts and they have to learn how to do it. And so you ask open-ended questions and you kind of try to pick it up from there, but you're non-committal with what you're saying. My question, and I probably should wait till after you give your example, it's a perfect example, but how do they learn? I mean, did these guys work as clerks somewhere? There
They
weren't
did.
books. There weren't books, so they had to sit there and watch somebody else do it. Did they get a chance to try it?
They definitely served apprenticeships, right? I mean, for sure. Right? It was called shimush, right? That they were a combination apprentice servant sort of relationship. Okay. I mean, because I know that there's a Gemara that I've taught before, right? Because the next we're going to get to Shemaiah and Avtalio. And they are the generation before Hillel. Okay. And at one point, Hillel has been elevated to the head of the academy and he starts to get haughty and he says, the rest of you don't know anything because you apprentice shaloshi mashtem et shemaya va'avtalio, that you did not serve slash apprentice under Shemaiah and Avtalio. Okay, so definitely it was an apprenticeship sort of situation. You sat in the academy for sure, but you also, had a master disciple relationship with a particular. Okay, so the example of like, be careful lest from your words the witnesses learn to lie. One of the things that as a conservative rabbi, right, I have to be very, very, very careful about is issues of personal status, right? I mean, there are certain things that are known as standards of rabbinic practice, okay? And it has mostly to do with marriage, conversion, divorce, recognition of Jewish status, right? I mean, to what degree and how, and the particulars of how I observe Shabbat, the particulars of how I keep kosher, that's up to me, right? I mean, as long as I don't, let's say, cause a public scandal. You walk into, Applebee's and see me eating, a ham sandwich. But in terms of like personal status, right? Like somebody, comes to me and they've been previously divorced, it's not up to me to say, well, a civil divorce is sufficient, right? It's just not up to me to do that, right? But so a couple will come to me, right? And they want me to, and particularly if they're, not kids, right? And they want me to officiate their weddings. Have either of you been married previously? Right? And one of them says, yes, I was. Okay, so what is the follow-up question? The follow-up question is, was your first spouse Jewish? Okay, now, very often, because I can see the gears spinning,
Your screen is frozen.
I thought it was me.
Anybody have him, the number on your cell phone that you can text?
How did I become the host?
No.
Yeah.
I guess you're
No.
gonna take over now.
Well, I'm fascinated because, well, Alan's question, it was Alan, right? Uh, Isn't Alan a lawyer also? Yeah, oh, he's on the phone with the rabbi. Okay, so anyway, his question was very intriguing because I was discussing with my friends last week the testimony of Stephen in the New Testament, and apparently they have a completely different idea about how the judges sat in the court, and but they do show in that drawing the benches of the students or disciples, or like you said, apprentices, and if somebody would die during a trial, they would make sure that the next in line in terms of their knowledge already heard all of the details, didn't miss even one meeting, and he can continue being the judge and take over, which is incredible because first of all they have to take attendance basically. Like you can't be part of the court if you haven't been here for all of the deliberations and everything. So testimonies. Yeah, maybe tomorrow morning, part two of this discussion, I'll finally convince them that that the people who wrote the New Testament didn't have the same kind of reverence that we have, that you copy every letter without any mistakes. And because the issue was that Stephen said in his testimony that Jacob was buried in the Machpelah cave, but it was bought from Hamor's Shechem, son of Hamor, in Shechem in Nablus, which is 150 kilometers away north. So I used to say, what, the Arabs don't know where to throw rocks, and it's like the Machpelah cave is, everybody knows it's in Hebron, like it's and so Stephen didn't make that mistake. Period. Anyway, hopefully Rabbi Arian will come back, but I'm just fascinated. My friends are Baptists, by the way, so every Friday morning we get together. I try to teach them Parsha, and they bring up all kinds of issues. Anyway.
some reason, my home internet went down, so I'm on my phone. So everybody's gonna have to be looking at the text on their own. I don't have it to share. Is that okay? Can you all hear me?
Yes,
Very good, Avot.
No.
Thank you.
yes.
All right. So I don't know exactly. Oh, now it says I'm connected. Hold on a second. Let me try and get back on. Okay. Oh, here I am. Okay. All right. So now I have to get off the other one.
The wonders of modern technology.
Okay, hold on.
There we go.
Let me do the share screen. All right,
Ah,
there we go. All right, so let me back up because I don't know how much you actually heard of what I was saying before.
Excuse me, Rabbi, do you have to start recording again?
No, it was still recording. It was recording you. So I hope you didn't say anything mean about me because um anyway, so right, so this couple comes to me and so I have to ask, were any of you were either of you previously married? And one of them says, yes, I was. So my follow-up question is, so let's assume it's a man who was married to a woman, right? Was your first wife Jewish? Right. And so I see the gears in their head and they're saying to themselves, well, maybe I should tell the rabbi that she was Jewish because I don't want the rabbi to yell at me for having been married to a non-Jew. Right. But actually, what is the answer that I want to hear?
did you give her a get?
No, I want to hear that she wasn't Jewish.
Oh, okay.
Because if she wasn't Jewish, there's no issue of a get. There's no issue of a get. So right. I mean, it's simpler and cleaner if the first spouse was not Jewish, right? So sometimes I've seen this. They've been tempted to lie. Okay, it's never happened yet to my knowledge. But that's the kind of where they could actually sort of learn to lie because they want to give you the answer that they think you want rather than the answer that is actually true. Okay.
But the other first question is, were you divorced or were you widowed?
Well, that's true. Yeah. No, of course. I mean, yeah. I mean, I guess I've never encountered that. I mean, I suppose they would say, well, I don't know. But you're right. I mean, I'm assuming previously married means divorced when it could in fact mean widowed. Um, I don't know. That's weird. It's never occurred to me. Maybe because I was younger, not that people don't lose spouses at a young age, but no, that's true. It never occurred to me. All right. So the next Mishnah, Shemaiah va'Avtalion kiblu mihem. Okay, Shemaiah and Avtalion, they're the next generation. Note Avtalion, also another Greek name, right? It's not a Hebrew name. Avtalion kiblu mihem. Shemaiah omer. Shemaiah would say, Ehov et hamelacha, love work, usna et harabanut, okay, which there's a lot of jokes about this, right? Because literally, I mean, in modern Hebrew, rabbanut means the rabbinate, right? Which means like the official government rabbinate in Israel, which everybody hates, right? So this is one. So hate the rabbinate, but it means hate mastery, okay, or hate acting the superior. In other words, hate, don't, or let's say relations of dominance, right? Hate that. Va'al titvada la rashut. And this is a bad translation, I think. Do not draw near to the ruling authority. That'd be al titkarev la rashut. It means don't make yourself known to the ruling authority. Okay. Now, which is also in general good advice, right? Right? Don't it'll be better advice after January 20th. But don't make yourself known to the ruling authority. But of course, in the context of when Shemaiah and Avtalion are teaching, the ruling authority is the Romans, right? So you don't, right? You don't want to get on their radar screen, right? So Shemaiah is basically saying, work hard, don't try to dominate other people, and keep your head low. Don't make yourself known to the ruling authorities. Okay. Questions or comments on this? Okay. So next Mishnah, Avtalion Omer. Avtalion used to say, Hachamim hizaharu b'divrechem. Okay, this is another phrase that is well known, right? Sages, be careful with your words, right? And this is, this is also good advice. Not that I'm a sage, but but if you're meaning rabbis, right? Be careful what you say, right? Be careful what you say. And it's one of the reasons, I actually, I got an email today from somebody in the congregation. Okay, and I don't want to get sidetracked on this. Okay, but you may have read or heard that Amnesty International issued a report today that Israel is committing genocide. Okay, now words have meaning, right? And as far as I am concerned, there is a lot to criticize in how Israel has conducted and is conducting this war, but B, it is not genocide. Words have meaning. Okay, words have meaning. And if Israel intended to commit genocide, there would not be more Palestinians in Gaza today than there were on October 7th. It's just, if Israel wanted to commit genocide, I think it would be relatively simple for Israel to do. And so this congregant wanted me to write something about it to the congregation. And I actually started writing something, okay? And I just wasn't satisfied. And this is not something, frankly, that you just sort of dash off and say, well, it's good enough. No, there's no such thing as good enough in this particular situation. It has to be right. So, I told them I probably will write something, but not today and not tomorrow. It has to be done correctly. And that is an example, I think, of Hachamim hizaharu b'divrechem, right? Sages, be careful with your word. Okay? Shema tahovu chovat galut, lest you encounter the penalty of exile. Okay? Now I'm not sure whether this is like metaphorical or literal. Frankly, I'm not really sure. Okay? Because certainly the Romans had the ability to send people into exile, right? I mean, but by analogy, I think a rabbi who is not careful, who is frequently not careful with their words, could also incur the penalty of exile, right? Like, goodbye, thank you for your service, you're done, right? But be careful with your words, lest you incur the penalty of exile, and be exiled to a place of evil waters. And this part is clearly metaphorical. Vaishtu hatalmidim haba'im acharehem v'yamotu, and the students who come after you will drink from the evil waters and die. V'nimsa shem shamayim mitchalel, with the result that the name of heaven, meaning the names of God, becomes profane. Okay, I mean, this is again, I think that this is metaphorical. It's a little hard to understand, but I think the point is that, particularly when you are a rabbi teaching other people who will become rabbis, right? Or a teacher teaching other teachers or whatever, you have to be really, really careful, because there's like a multiplier effect, right? In other words, if I'm, and in that sense, I mean, look, my rabbinate doesn't have that kind of multiplier effect, right? But nevertheless, even, to a rabbi of a congregation, it's important to get it right. I mean, I know that people will, in other words, if I teach you all something that is clearly wrong, right? And then you all go and do it because the rabbi said right? I mean, that's a problem, right? So there is a level of responsibility. I mean, that doesn't only apply to rabbis, right? I mean, I go to Alan on a legal matter, and Alan gives me bad advice, and I follow it, right? I mean, that's a defense, right? Reliance on counsel, that's a defense. I go to Marilyn. Marilyn gives me bad advice, right? I mean, again, so I follow her bad advice, and then I get caught. Now, I'll have to pay the taxes, right? But not necessarily the penalty, right? Because I relied on my accountant. Or if I have to pay the penalty, I could go after Marilyn, and right?
After my insurer.
Right. Right. So, I mean, this responsibility doesn't only apply to rabbis, but it does apply to rabbis. I would say it applies to anybody upon whom other people rely for guidance, right? You have to be careful in how you do this. Right?
I think that's right, but I think beyond that, the modern version of that exile is that people then stop using the professional and go to somebody else, or they don't go to your synagogue if they're talking about you. And I don't think
Right.
that when this was written, it was that part of it was meant to be metaphoric. I think that people were exiled, but there's a more profound meaning, I believe.
Right, right. And I mean, there were competing religio-philosophical systems at that time too. I mean, there were people who chose to leave Judaism and become pagans. Eventually, there were people who chose to leave Judaism and become Christians. So I mean, it wasn't as easy as it is today, right? I mean, and that's essentially the novum of Jewish life since 1789, is that you can just walk away, right? You don't have to actively become something else. You just walk away, right? Which is what most Jews do in one way or another, frankly. But yeah, I mean, right, that exile, right, and then the drink, right, it could mean simply, um, a loss of a constituency, so to speak. All right. So, next Mishnah, Hillel v'Shammai kiblu bihem. Hillel and Shammai received the tradition from them, Shmai and Avtalion. Even if all these other sages were people that you never heard of, I assume that you've all heard of Hillel and Shammai. Hillel Omer, Hillel used to say, and note, Hillel's getting like more lines here than most of them, right? Doesn't necessarily mean very much. I'll tell a story on myself because I told this to somebody last week. So a few years ago, it was a 3-volume history of Georgetown University that was published. And at least in volume 3, for every decade, there was a short listing of like prominent people who had graduated from Georgetown in that decade, right? And my listing was longer than Bill Clinton's listing. Okay. Why? Because I've had more jobs than Bill Clinton had, right? It was just the listing of your jobs, right? But here, no, Hillel gets, um, a lot of lines. It's not just that he had more jobs. Hillel used to say, Have mitamidav shel Aharon, be of the disciples of Aaron, Ohev Shalom, Virodef Shalom, loving peace and pursuing peace. Ohev et habriot, love your fellow creatures, loving humanity. Umikarvan LaTorah, and draw them close to the Torah. Okay, and in the rabbinic tradition, Aaron is the lover of peace par excellence. Okay, frankly, there's not a lot of biblical support on which to hang that reputation. But I just actually finished 4 weeks of study on the role of the high priest in the rabbinic tradition. And Aaron, of course, had been the first high priest, and a lot about how he would, and what's the difference between loving peace and pursuing peace, right? Right. Pursuing peace is more active, right? It's not just a disposition, right? It's an action orientation, right? To be a pursuer of peace, love your fellow human beings, bring them near to the Torah, and Hillel says that's the type of person that you should be. If you remember, particularly if you were in shul on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, right? I taught this was from the Gemara, right? But why the tradition generally preferred the position of Beit Hillel, the house of Hillel, right? When there's dispute, because they were the disputants par excellence, the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai, right? But the tradition, as a general rule, not in every case, but as a general rule, chose the Hillel position rather than the Shammai position. And it wasn't because Hillel was objectively correct and Shammai objectively incorrect. It had more to do with the personal characteristics of the two. All right. Next Mishnah. Now you won't notice this. But this is a very, very, very rare Mishnah in that it's not in Hebrew, it's in Aramaic. Okay. Hu haya omer. Okay, that's Hebrew. He used to say, Naged Shma Aved Shmei. All right. One who makes his name great causes his name to be destroyed, right? In other words, if you pursue fame, your reputation will be destroyed. Udala Mosif Yasaf, one who does not add to his knowledge causes it to cease, right? In other words, if you stop learning, right, that's it. You should never stop learning. Udala Ya'alif Kat Lachayav, right? And one who does not study Torah deserves death, right? I don't think he meant this literally. Maybe he did. I don't know. Udeishtamesh bataga halaf. And if you make unworthy use of the crown of Torah, the crown of learning, you shall pass away, right? In other words, so this is like general sort of advice as to how to like be in the world, right? Don't seek to make a great name for yourself, right? It won't work out. Always continue to add to your knowledge, or your knowledge will pass away. And if you don't learn Torah, you're deserving of death. But if you have the crown of Torah, you have the crown of learning, don't use it in an unworthy manner. Okay. Any questions or comments on this? All right. So if not, we will go on to probably the most famous Mishnah in all of Pirkei Avot, maybe in all of the Mishnah, right? This is one that you all know. Some of you might even know it in Hebrew. Hu haya omer, he used to say, meaning Hillel, im ein anili mili, right? If I am not for myself, who is for me? Im ein anili mili, if I'm not for myself, who is for me? Uchshe ani la'atzmi ma'ani, but if I am for my own self, what am I? the imlo achshav ematai, and if not now, when? All right. So I mean, the first two phrases, right? That's the classic tension, right? That's the classic tension, right? If I'm not for myself, right? Who will, right? But if I'm only for myself, right? What am I? Right? And this is right. So, like, you know, every rabbi gets this question on a regular basis, right? Is our responsibility as Jews to take care of other Jews, or is our responsibility as Jews to take care of everybody, right? And what's the answer?
Both are correct and both are wrong.
Both, well, how are both wrong?
Because sometimes you'll choose, to give time to your non-Jewish neighbor, but your son right now needs you more than that. Like I set myself up for failure by having a study. I just told the people when you were gone, and every Friday morning I learn with a few Baptist friends, and my family needs to talk to me, and I'm not available. So
Right. Okay, so, but that's not wrong. It's just a question of, right? So that's the third part. If not now, when? And the answer is later. I don't know. But, right? I mean, yes, we are responsible, right? I mean, I spoke about this on, I think I spoke about on Yom Kippur, and I call concentric circles of responsibility, right? Concentric circles of responsibility, right? Your first priority is yourself, and it's really yourself, because if you don't take care of yourself, you're useless to anybody, right? But then beyond that, it's your family, right? And then it's your extended family. And look, and different people will view it differently, but it's not 100% one and 0% the other, right? Everybody has to figure out the balance that is appropriate for them. And yes, I mean, sometimes, the situation will be such that you have to spend most of your energy and most of your resources, whatever they are, on Jewish causes to the exclusion of the other. But there may be other times that, the opposite is the case, right? And you have to balance the particularistic and the universal, right? And it's not wrong to take care of yourself and your family, right? But it is wrong to only take care of yourself and your family, right? Which gets us back to being of the disciples of Aaron, right? Loving your fellow human being and bringing them nearer to the Torah. And interestingly, it doesn't say, it doesn't say, um, it says, oh, Havata Briot, right? Loving Briot means literally fellow creatures, right? It doesn't say love your fellow Jews and bring them near to the Torah, right? It says love your fellow human beings and bring them nearer to the Torah, okay? And again, not by means of preaching, but by means of action of the example that you set, right? So, very, like I said, it's a Mishnah that everybody knows, although people often misquote it, right? I've heard it say, right, because it says, if not now, when? And I've heard that more as frequently, if not you, who? It doesn't say if not you, who. It says if not now, when, right? But even non-Jewish politicians quote this Mishnah. Okay. Comments, questions? Okay, so now we get to Shammai, right? And Shammai only gets one Mishnah. And Shammai has this reputation as, I don't know, not very pleasant, right? I mean, there's this whole sugya which I just studied again when I was, about, I said I was studying with another rabbi about the high priest in rabbinic thought, and there's this discuss. I mean, again, then part of it is something that you all know, right? About Hillel, right? And the convert or the would-be convert who comes to Hillel and says, I want to convert on condition that you teach me the entire Torah while I stand on one foot, right? And so what does Hillel tell him, right? Right, what is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. This is the whole Torah. All the rest is commentary. Go and learn, right? What we don't as often teach, right? And so this is the fault of the rabbis. It's not the fault of the students. But I love the first part of that pericope because there are three would-be converts, right? And in each case, they go first to Shammai, and Shammai rejects them. And then Hillel accepts them. And, by rights, Hillel should not have accepted them, but they found them. So this guy goes first to Shammai and says the same thing, right? I want to convert on condition that you teach me the whole Torah while I stand on one foot. Okay, now Shammai was by profession, because back then, like, the rabbinate was not a profession. You didn't earn your living by being a rabbi. You had another job. Bad idea, but that's the way they did it back then. And Shammai was a builder, okay, and he had a builder's cubit in his hand when this guy came to him. And what did Shammai do? He hit him with his builder's cubit, okay, which, so he's my kind of guy. But that's the reputation that he has. You would never guess that from this Mishnah, right? So Shammai used to say, Aseh Torah Keva, make the study of Torah a fixed practice, right? In other words, set time aside. I'm not qualified to say whether studying with Baptists counts as Torah study or not Torah study, right? But you're Kovea Itim, right? Which is, right, it's supposed to, right? You're supposed to make it a fixed practice. You're not supposed to say, well, I'm busy, right? When I get some free time, I'll study, right? Study, a fixed regular basis. Emor ma'at ve'aseh harbe, say little and do much. Okay, which is, I mean, the first part, say little, I'm not very good at. Hopefully I'm better at doing much, but I'm more harbe va'aseh harbe, right? Right. But it said, so Shammai says, say little and do much. V'havei mikabel et kol ha'adam b'sever panim yafo. Receive all men with a pleasant countenance, right? Be nice to everybody. Okay, again, which is not the reputation that Shammai has. I mean, I probably did not receive that would-be convert, with a pleasant countenance, but people give advice that they themselves don't always follow or live up to. Questions or comments on this, Mr., or on anything or everything that we've done tonight? And I apologize, not that it's my fault, but I apologize for my internet having cut out. I don't know. It doesn't happen that often, but when it does happen, it can be pretty devastating. Questions, comments?
Yeah, sure, cool. I am going to share it with them tomorrow.
Okay.
I have a general question.
Yeah, sure, Toby.
In most of the portions here, there's a comment about and someone told them, or the whatever they were involved in with each of these. How long ago were they given the advice, or I think you've mentioned it before, but
Right. Well, so this is one generation after another. Okay. So, I mean, Hillel and Shammai, which is where we are now, roughly contemporaneous with Jesus. Okay. I mean, taking what we know about Hillel and Shammai, and I will say no, right, versus what is said about Jesus, which I think we're on less solid ground saying that we actually know, right? But they lived at the same time, okay? I mean, Hillel and Shammai were alive at the same time that Jesus was supposed to be alive, okay? So, roughly 2,000 years ago, okay? Now, the Mishnah was not codified in its final form until 200 years after that. Okay, so this would have been handed down orally until it was written down and codified roughly the year 200 of the Common Era. Okay, so, and as I mentioned, right, we have discussions in the Gemara where they're thinking that, well, maybe the Mishnah was mistransmitted, right? So, on the one hand, right, we have a culture that places tremendous importance on the accurate transmission of everything that went before, both in terms of what was said and who said it. But on the other hand, transmitted by human beings and not by angels, right? And therefore, possibility of error certainly creeping in. Okay. And what we'll see just going forward, right? So Hillel and Shammai are really the last of the pairs. Okay, because then we're going to see Rabban Gamliel. Rabban Gamliel was the son of Hillel. Okay, and he became the head of the Sanhedrin. And then so all of the people that are quoted for the rest of chapter 1, right? You'll see Rabban Gamliel and then Shimon, his son, right? And then there's a Shimon ben Gamliel, and eventually being the head of the Sanhedrin became a hereditary thing among the descendants of Hillel rather than a position that was attained, by virtue of being the most qualified. Similarly to what happens in what has happened in Hasidism, right? Where if you're the Rebbe of whatever group of Hasidim, your son is going to inherit that position from you, right? Whether they're qualified or not. And then eventually we'll get down to Yehuda HaNasi, who he didn't personally necessarily do all of it, but under him and under his authority, the Mishnah was codified. Okay, and so that's the year 200 CE roughly. Okay, and that's the end of an era, because any rabbi who is quoted in the Mishnah is known as a Tana. Okay, and then when you get into the Gemara, you have Tanaim, meaning the rabbis who are quoted in the Mishnah, and then the later rabbis who are subsequent to the codification of the Mishnah, they are known as Amoraim. Okay, and they have less authority, right? So if you have a dispute between a Tana and an Amora, the Tana always wins. Okay, the only way, if the only way you could grasp that victory back for your side, right? If the other side has a Tana and all you have are Amoraim, if you can find a Tana for your position, right? I mean, I suppose in, American law, it's the same thing, right? I mean, some courts, right, are authoritative and some are not authoritative. And then, there's a table of authorities and so on and so forth. I mean, I'm not an expert in where you have two Tanaim. There are charts that say, if it's this Tana versus this Tana and the subject is this, then this Tana prevails. But if the subject is this, then the other one prevails. I know where to find those charts. I don't know those charts by heart. But yeah, I'm digressing. Anyway, good night and Shabbat Shalom.
Good night.
Shabbat
Thank you.
shalom.
Now it's
Right.
all.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat
Shabbat
shalom.
Shalom.